absolutely right. So the you that it will never be, according to the FBI Elder Fraud 2023 report, scams targeting individuals age 60 and older caused over $3.4 billion in 2023, coming from roughly 90,000 people. The average victim of elder fraud lost $33,915 in 2023. And elder fraud complaints to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center increased by 14% in 2023, and its associated losses increased by about 11%. What that tells you, among other things, is that this is becoming an increasingly organized crime. It's an international organized crime. It's not 2-bit stuff anymore. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and why I think I have the right to be talking to you about this. The last 15 years of my career as a realtor, I worked with seniors who had reached the point where they could no longer live in their home. Typically, they had kids in Rhode Island and Texas who had completely differing ideas of what to do with mom or dad. They had 50 years of stuff in their homes. They often had disabilities. I worked with one woman who finally, a severe diabetic, who finally, after her toes were removed, realized that she had to move. So there were a lot of people who I've worked with who have been hit up by scams. Hey. I worked with a lot of these folks. I unfortunately had to there's some chairs up here if you want to be more comfy.
Okay.
Around Mike.
They have paper. Oh, hi.
I would say that in those years, I had about 10 situations where I had to call Adult Protective Services. It's not pretty. It's never pretty. So I'm going to start by telling you a story that happened to me this summer. My very dear friend Alan, who is also my son's godfather, his husband Steve had Parkinson's disease, had been ill for a very long time, and was finally in the VA hospital for 8 months before he died. They had a big house, and Alan was in that house all on his own. And we kept pretty close touch with him. He's a year older than me, so 78, but very active. And one day he got a phone call. Alan, hi, this is Wendy. Do you remember me? I met you a few times for lunch through your old friend Gary. Do you remember me? And Alan said he did. Wendy said, I'm in a desperate situation. I've lost my house, I've lost all my money. None of my friends can help me. Do you think I could come stay with you for a couple of weeks? Now, Alan is a smart guy. Alan is a PhD school psychologist. That will never be me. When he moved in, we all said to Alan, don't do it. This sounds terrible. And please don't give her any money. Or as my spouse said, lock up the silverware.
Or keep your house.
Right. So time goes by. It seems to be okay. And in August, Alan's husband Steve dies. So we all go to San Francisco to be with Alan and for the funeral and what have you. And my son Daniel, Alan's godson, was over at the house. And Wendy comes in and says, oh, My car expenses were so terribly expensive, I have no money. Parentheses, she drives a Beamer. Can you pay for this? Daniel was like, so when he walks out of the room and Daniel says, what's going on? Alan says, I don't want to talk about it, walks out and slams the door. Daniel, I promise you, is not a pushover. I found that out. Goes after him and says, you have to tell me what's going on here. And eventually Alan tells him that Wendy's story is she is in love with a guy she met online. The guy is a doctor from Florida, but oh dear, he's in jail in Turkey and needs money to get out of jail. Very sad. So Alan, being a kind person, is giving money to Wendy to send to this guy. Interestingly, and you talked about this earlier, he had to be withdrawing cash from his bank account, and that money was being put in a Bitcoin machine. Do you know what a Bitcoin machine is? Because I didn't. No, you put money in and then you buy Bitcoin. So there is no paper trail, right? This went on long enough and were frequent enough, large enough withdrawals that Alan's bank sent out APD, Adult Protective Services. And Alan said, oh no, I'm not being scanned, don't worry about it, and sent them away. So finally he told Daniel, my son, about all of this, and then he made him swear not to tell anybody, and particularly me, because I know about these things. So Daniel left and came home to where we were staying and immediately told me all about it. And he said, Mom, I don't know what to do. And I said, I do. And that was a Saturday evening. Sunday morning, we called a colleague of mine who was a gerontologist, and I said, Mary, sorry it's a Sunday, what do we do here? Mary said, here's what you need to do for starters. Somehow, Daniel needs to get into Wendy's bedroom and find out more information about her. And you'll probably have to file a report with APD. So we go over to Alan's that night for dinner. I corner Wendy and have a long, charming conversation with her. I was ever so friendly. And Daniel goes upstairs to Wendy's bedroom and finds out all kinds of information about her, including the emails from this guy and his name. The next day we called APD, filed a report. Daniel Googled this guy. Turns out that he was wanted by the FBI for a large number of international scams.
So Wendy was being scammed?
Wendy, it's never been clear to us. What I think is that this guy was grooming Wendy to do this. Wendy knew that Alan had a lot of money, and it's probable that the guy said to her, so, you know, if you help me, who do you know who has a lot of money? Alan inherited a lot of money.
So did Wendy really know Alan?
Well, she knew Gary, and Alan knew Gary. And Alan has changed the story several times as to whether he had a few lunches with Wendy 30 years ago or didn't. There's a big deal about feeling shame when you're being scammed. The moral of the story and what ended up happening was we did call APD. APD said, you need to call the cops and get her out of the house. Alan was finally willing to acknowledge that this was true. The police came and stood there while Wendy's stuff was packed up and moved out. Alan still, after that, at one point said to me, you know, I think I'll call Wendy and see how she's doing. It's not unusual. It's not unusual. So There are a number of reasons why seniors are vulnerable to scams. One of them is, if you're lucky, you have savings. Our generation was taught to save money. So it is not unlikely that a senior will have a small or large nest egg. Also, seniors are vulnerable to scams because we were raised to be polite. I mean, God forbid I wasn't. So if you get a phone call, hey, it's Wendy, how are you? Hey, it's the fireman's fund trying to raise money. Hey. We are raised to be polite. So we respond to that. The other thing that is sadly so true for seniors is that they are isolated and lonely. Alan certainly was at that point. It had been so stressful with Steve in the hospital, being demented and raving, that anybody to talk to, anyone who would be sympathetic, having somebody, and it was a big Victorian house, was such a relief to him. That's how he felt for it. And it's not surprising. Another big hit point is when you've just had a loss of your child or your spouse or what have you, you are disoriented and confused. When my late spouse died, people would say to me, how are you? And the word I used the most was disoriented. It had been so long since I'd made a decision on my own. I was like, well, what do you think? And what if we, and I was like, oh. People are disoriented, and there are a number of things they might fall for that they wouldn't otherwise. So, reported to the FBI, an example. Kim is grieving the tragic death of her son who was serving in the Army when she learns that she's the sole beneficiary of his military death benefit. To help with financial decisions at such a vulnerable time, an advisor named Kaz Craffy is offered by the military. That's a good thing. Kim plans to use the money to buy a home, but Craffy insists that she makes investments in stocks of specific interest to him. One day, Kim is contacted by the FBI and learns that Craffy is under investigation for redirecting military benefits to investments that pay him high commissions. Would a government official do this to you? Not a bad chance. You know, scammers come in every size, shape, and form. Another story like that. Lorraine is grieving her father when she receives a letter claiming to be from Florida Power and Light, notifying her to contact them. Not unreasonable. A kind operator named Anna walks her through the process of switching the account from her father to setting up a new one in her name and paying a deposit. A few weeks later, a notice from the real Florida Power and Light arrives in Lorraine's mailbox, and she realizes Anna wasn't who she said she was. The criminals had gotten away with the $300 deposit. Much more important to them, they've gotten away with information. They've gotten away with her name, her address, and her bank information. That leaves her vulnerable in so many ways. And because, as I said, this is an international business, they sell names. So once you've been hit, you're really ripe to be hit again. The other thing is, seniors have a lot of shame about not understanding things that are going on. So the other day, first of all, I will tell you that I got completely fed up with Windstream and said, I'm done. But yeah, isn't that amazing? But I still needed a landline. So I got a device that's called an UMA, which is half that you get this little piece of equipment, And then you pay way less than they would charge you for the landline and its internet landline. Great. However, I was having trouble setting up my voicemail, which I really need for things that I do. I spent over an hour looking at the instructions, looking at the what to do, la 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 la. And I was like, oh. And a little later I thought, oh well, I'll just call them. Why didn't I call them sooner? Honest to God, I thought they'll know I'm an old person who doesn't know how to do this stuff. I care why. This is somebody in India. I mean, really? But it's in us. We lose certain capacities. And the other thing that we all know is we don't get tech as well as younger people do. I don't. If I talk to my son and I say, blah, 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 he just says, oh, net, 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 net. Oh, great. But we're ashamed of that. We're ashamed of not understanding. I'm actually lucky. I first used a computer when I was 50. And I was in a business that they trained me how to use a computer. And as I went, I learned and learned and learned because I had to learn on the job. I bet that happened to you. But that's not true for most of us. So a lot of people will see a little ad that says tech support available. So I'd like to tell you that there were 18,000 tech support scams in 2023. According to the FBI, what do you think? That's about half of how many there actually were. If you need tech support and you don't have son, daughter, niece, nephew, somebody else's kids, grandkids, whatever, to do it for you, and you need tech support because, yeah, sometimes we really do, use somebody reputable. If you bought at Best Buy, what are they called? The Goon Squad?
The
Geek Squad. Use Apple tech support, use any tech support that you already know. Because if someone gets into your computer, and I'll tell you another story about that later, you really are in trouble. You have too much stuff in there, stuff you know and stuff you don't know. And finally, think about Alan and how ashamed he was. Whether he believed he was being scammed consciously or whether he knew that he was being scammed, he made Daniel promise not to tell anyone. He would rather continue losing money than admit that he'd been scammed. Not unusual. Yeah, it could be you. Tell you another story. It happened to somebody here in the valley. So Joan, who is 80, maybe over that, a number of us who know her were aware that she was slipping mentally. Somebody who works for her found out because Joan told her that she had been giving money away to these lovely young men who'd been calling her. And they had asked her if they could put their money in her bank account. So then they had access to her bank account. And she kept doing this and doing this. And eventually, the credit union, our credit union, closed her account because they were so concerned about what Joan was doing. Somebody who works for Joan told me about this, called me and said, look, I don't know what to do here, but I know this is going on and I think you know something about it. And I said, yep, you bet I do. And so we thought about it for a while. And I and another friend And the person who works for her went over to her house unannounced, unexpected, and called her husband in because he had not been aware of this. And we all sat down and did an intervention. Joan insisted that these were lovely young men and they were really helping her. And furthermore, they were going to fly her to New York and wine and dine her for how wonderful she was. I might also add that Joan was finally putting her money. So the money would go through the account and she'd give it to them in cash. And so it was not only that she was laundering their money, she was now giving them money, supposedly for good works. And Joan's a pretty charitable guy, so she really liked it. We went and did an intervention. She insisted that she was not being scammed, that none of this was true. We did call Sandoval County Adult Protective Services. They said you need to call the cops, and they would come out and take a report. I was a little concerned that the person that Sandoval Sheriff's Office would send out would not know a thing about this. It turns out they sent somebody really knowledgeable, which is great for us to know. And they said, here's what you need to do. You need to change your phone number. You need to change every single password on your computer. And you need to change your bank. Joan had moved it to another bank. And all of that was done. And last I heard, Joan is still doing it, and there is nothing to be done.
New bank account.
And just still using the same computer and refusing to change the phone numbers. And there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. The other thing that had been suggested was that she get tested cognitively, but she's refusing. So also, this is not unusual. Okay, I've told you all terrible stories. What can you do to protect yourself? What are the two numbers you should never, ever, 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 ever give out?
Your birthday and your social security. Social security.
Birthday, social security number, Medicare number. Never, never, never give those out. They are the key, particular social security number, to everything about you. So I can't say this enough time, and I will say it over and over and over again. No one at these agencies needs those numbers. Occasionally, people will ask for the last four numbers of your social. That's okay. The whole thing, not on your mind. Don't do it. Any phone call from Medicare or Social Security is a tape. When have they actually ever called you? They don't do that. What they do is they will occasionally email you, but even those I wouldn't believe in. They send you paper mail. They come by snail mail. If you get an email from them, look at it, don't click on anything, and go to the Social Security website. And in there, look up anything. If you get a text from them, immediately click on report junk delete.
I got a call, it was just today, and it was about the open enrollment in insurance. I was getting, it didn't have like Tucumcari, New Mexico, you know, so I was sitting there going, I don't know, you know, it comes up something, right? So they're sitting there saying, well, I'm calling about this open enrollment. And I'm going, did that same thing? I'm sorry. Click.
Good.
You know, and I have called and reported it?
You could. I mean,
You
that
know,
happened to me.
I mean,
several-
I don't know. It's just like, I don't like unsolicited phone calls, and I don't give any information out with the phone.
Thank you, Jen.
And it's like, what? Excuse me, you know, you're just fishing.
I tell you what, I no longer answer phone calls from unknown numbers. If they really want me, they'll leave a voicemail. They can do that. But if I don't know the number, I simply don't answer it.
And then I
Now,
go,
it is open enrollment time.
yes, I know.
So, and I don't know about you, but I've been receiving so much paper mail about, I don't know, Cigna and blah and who and what.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, do not respond to those.
The other one I got was somebody that said they knew my name, and that was like, well, who are you? And they said, well, I'm Wilma.
Hi, Wilma.
And I'm going, okay. And they says, did you just spend like $3,000 down in Florida? And I said, of course not. And they says, well, I suggest you cancel your your credit card then. And I said, okay, click. And I called up my credit card, and there was no charge on there. There was another phishing thing.
However, my credit card will note somebody once charged 8 $600 flights on Delta, and my credit card notified me. I don't fly Delta, and I sure hadn't purchased all those trips. So that one, I'm not sure how they contacted me. It was a while ago, so the technology was different. But one thing that it is a good idea to do, it happened to me this past summer again. I noticed some charges on my statement. They were small, they were like $17 and $13, but I thought, eh. And I called my credit card and they said, I said, those I did not do. And they looked through it and they said, okay, we will delete all of these. It is not a bad idea, and I do it fairly frequently now, throughout the month, to check your credit card.
And
activity.
I have my credit card set up, so I forget how I did this, probably because somebody tried to scam me. But anytime my credit card is used without being present, you know, any charge, like, okay, you got Amazon Prime is being charged $16, and they will always notify me that $16 is I get a notice every month, you know. And so some of them are legit, you know, and then all of them are legit mostly. But they also notify me anytime my charges are more than X amount of dollars.
Mhm.
So I say, if there's a charge over $300, you know, so they just send me these things automatically, so you can get that done.
However, I will also tell you that I've been recently getting texts that purport to be Amazon. It says your shipment is held up in the warehouse and you have to send this information. You've been getting those?
2 or 3.
And I just go, meh. And I am an Amazon shopper, right? But at that moment, I wasn't expecting anything anyway. So again, hit report junk delete. Is anybody here not an internet user?
Not what?
The internet user.
You don't use the internet. So what I'm going to say to you, since I, for example, if I get something from Medicare or Social Security, I go to their website. If I think it's a scam, in your situation, it would be good to phone them. That would be the better idea, so that you can find out what's actually happening. Don't give out your credit card number unless it's a transaction you've initiated. Bad idea. You may get emails or texts that appear to be from your bank. A lot of these scammers can duplicate your bank's website so that it looks just like it. If it's unexpected, don't have anything to do with it. And again, check with your bank in whatever way works best for you. I think we all know about charity scams. If they call you on the, again, if it's an unknown phone number, I won't bother. But if you're a lonely, isolated senior and you get a call from somebody who's more than happy to chat with you and learn all about your life, and would you donate to the Cats and Dog Sad Paws Society? No. Just don't. This next scam is one that we really all hope and expect won't happen to us, but it does. So I had a friend named Steve who lived back east, owned a house, had grown kids, and one of them was a contractor. And this contractor's son came to Steve and said, look, I need some money to complete the job I'm working on. Can we pull equity from the house? And of course, I'll pay you that. Steve put his son on title of the property. And everybody thought it would just be for this one transaction. 4 years later, Steve received a notice that his house was being foreclosed on. Steve's son had continued to withdraw money from equity, had worked with a really skanky loan officer and escrow officer, and the money had gone down to such a point that Steve lost his house, lost his credit rating, and lost all the savings that were in that house. You don't believe it can happen to you. I wouldn't. Steve didn't. It's not only a financial horror, it's a heart horror. And we don't think we need to protect ourselves from this kind of thing, but the truth is, if that happens, you might want to make it so that only one transaction can be allowed from title. You also might want to put things in a trust, and only the trustees can allow that. And you probably want someone to be your power of attorney who you know and trust and have known and trusted for a very long time. But sadly, that's something else you need to protect from. Now, the other thing is in-home caregivers. Now, I recently had a patient to try and find somebody from an agency in Albuquerque to come up and do in-home care. I called 7 agencies. The only way you can get somebody from an agency to come up here is if someone up here will go to that agency. There are a couple of agencies that will train them. If they're from an agency, they are licensed, bonded, and insured. However, that's a pain in the butt and you might not find someone to do it. So if you're going to have someone come into your home and you're older and not well and vulnerable, make sure that it's somebody who is known to several people you know and trust. Don't let just anyone into your home. I'm going to wrap up here with some repeat information. How to protect yourself. If you don't understand, ask for help. There is no shame in it. If there are legal documents you need to sign for whatever reason, and you don't get them, ask somebody who will. Ask them to help you. There's no shame in it. In fact, it's smart. We talked about before, if you don't know how to use technology, ask somebody younger than you. You know. Again, never give out your Social Security, Medicare, credit card number. And finally, when in doubt, don't. If you have a hair of unease, not suspicion, unease about anything. If someone puts pressure on you to say you gotta sign it now or you lose the deal. Don't. When in doubt, don't. You're smart, not a fool. Thank you. Let me get Janet to turn off the recording, and then if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Turn it off and